Hey kiddos. So the last time we read, Frodo read the letter that Mr. Butterbur forgot to give him, that forgot to send to him, that Gandalf had left with Mr. Butterbur. So we're going to pick up the story right there. Frodo read the letter to himself, and then passed it to Pippin and Sam. Really, old Butterbur had made a mess of things, he said. He deserves roasting. If I had got this at once, we might all have been safe in Rivendell by now. But what can have happened to Gandalf? He writes as if he was going into great danger. He has been doing that for many years, said Strider. Frodo turned and looked at him thoughtfully, wondering about Gandalf's second postscript. Why didn't you tell me that you were Gandalf's friend at once? He asked. It would have saved time. Would it? Would any of you have believed me till now? Said Strider. I knew nothing of this letter. For all I knew, I had to persuade you to trust me without proofs, if I was to help you. In any case, I did not intend to tell you all about myself at once. I had to study you first and make sure of you. The enemy has set traps for me before now. As soon as I had made up my mind, I was ready to tell you whatever you asked. But I must admit, he added with a queer laugh, that I hoped you would take to me for my own sake. A hunted man sometimes wearies of distrust and longs for friendship. But there, I believe, my looks are against me. They are, at first sight at any rate, laughed Pippin, with sudden relief after reading Gandalf's letter. But handsome is as handsome does, as we say in the Shire, and I dare say we shall all look much the same after lying for days in hedges and ditches. It would take more than a few days or weeks or years of wandering in the wild to make you look like the Strider, he answered. And you would die first, unless you are made of sterner stuff than you look to be. Pippin subsided, but Sam was not daunted, and he still eyed Strider dubiously. How do we know you are the Strider that Gandalf speaks about? He demanded. You never mentioned Gandalf till this letter came out. You might be a play-acting spy for all I can see, trying to get us to go with you. You might have done in the real Strider and took his clothes. What have you to say to that? That you are a stout fellow, answered Strider, but I am afraid my only answer to you, Sam Gamgee, is this. If I had killed the real Strider, I could kill you, and I should have killed you already without so much talk. If I was after the ring, I could have it now. He stood up and seemed suddenly to grow taller. In his eyes gleamed a light, keen and commanding. Throwing back his cloak, he laid his hand on the hilt of a sword that had hung concealed by his side. They did not dare to move. Sam sat wide-mouthed, staring at him dumbly. But I am the real Strider, fortunately, he said, looking down at them with his face softened by a sudden smile. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and if by life or death I can save you, I will. There was a long silence. At last Frodo spoke with hesitation. I believed that you were a friend before the letter came, he said, or at least I wished to. You have frightened me several times tonight, but never in a way that servants of the enemy would, or so I imagine. I think one of his spies would, well, seem fairer and feel fouler, if you understand. I see, laughed Strider. I look foul and feel fair, is that it? All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost. Did the verses apply to you then? Asked Frodo. I could not make out what they were about, but how did you know that they were in Gandalf's letter, if you have never seen it? I did not know, he answered, but I am Aragorn, and those verses go with that name. He threw out his sword, and they saw that the blade was indeed broken, a foot below the hilt. Not much use, is it, Sam? Said Strider, but the time is near when it shall be forged anew. Sam said nothing. Well, said Strider, with Sam's permission we will call that settled. Strider shall be your guide, and now I think it is time you went to bed and took what rest you can. We shall have a rough road tomorrow. Even if we are allowed to leave Bree unhindered, we can hardly hope now to leave it unnoticed. but I shall try to get lost as soon as possible. I know one or two ways out of Bree land other than the main road. If once we shake off the pursuit, I shall make for Weathertop." "Weathertop," said Sam. "What's that?" "It is a hill just to the north of the road, about halfway from here to Rivendell. It commands a wide view all around, and there we shall have a chance to look about us. Gandalf will make for that point if he follows us. After Weathertop, our journey will become more difficult, and we shall have to choose between various dangers." "When did you last see Gandalf?" asked Frodo. "Do you know where he is or what he is doing?" Strider looked grave. "I do not know," he said. "I came west with him in the spring. I have often kept watch on the borders of the Shire in the last few years, when he was busy elsewhere. He seldom left it unguarded. We last met on the 1st of May at Sarn Ford, down the Brandywine. He told me that his business with you had gone well, and that you would be starting for Rivendell in the last week of September. As I knew he was at your side, I went away on a journey of my own, and that has proven ill, for plainly some news reached him, and I was not at hand to help. I am troubled, for the first time since I have known him. We should have had messages, even if he could not come himself. When I returned many days ago, I heard the ill news. The tidings had gone far and wide that Gandalf was missing, and the horsemen had been seen. It was the elven folk of Gildor that told me this, and later that told me that you had left your home, but there was no news of your leaving Buckland. I have been watching the East Road anxiously." "Do you think the Black Riders have anything to do with it? With Gandalf's absence, I mean?" asked Frodo. "I do not know of anything else that could have hindered him, except the enemy himself," said Strider. "But do not give up hope. Gandalf is greater than you Shire folk know. As a rule, you can only see his jokes and toys, but this business of ours will be his greatest task." Pippin yawned. "I am sorry," he said, "but I am dead tired. In spite of all the danger and worry, I must go to bed, or sleep where I sit. Where is that silly fellow Merry? It would be the last straw if we had to go out in the dark to look for him." At that moment they heard a door slam. Then feet came running along the passage. Merry came in with a rush, followed by Nob. He shut the door hastily and leaned against it. He was out of breath. They stared at him in alarm for a moment before he gasped, "I have seen them, Frodo! I have seen them! Black Riders!" "Black Riders!" cried Frodo. "Where?" "Here in the village. I stayed indoors for an hour. Then as you did not come back, I went out for a stroll. I had come back again and was standing just outside the light of the lamp looking at the stars. Suddenly I shivered and felt that something horrible was creeping near. There was a sort of deeper shade among the shadows across the road, just beyond the edge of the lamplight. I slid away at once into the dark without a sound. There was no horse." "Which way did it go?" asked Strider, suddenly and sharply. Merry started, noticing the stranger for the first time. "Go on," said Frodo. "This is a friend of Gandalf's. I will explain later." "It seemed to make off up the road, eastward," continued Merry. "I tried to follow. Of course it vanished almost at once. But I went round the corner and on as far as the last house on the road." Strider looked at Merry with wonder. "You have a stout heart," he said, "but it was foolish." "I don't know," said Merry. "Neither brave nor silly, I think. I could hardly help myself. I seemed to be drawn somehow. Anyway, I went, and suddenly I heard voices by the hedge. One was muttering, and the other was whispering or hissing. I couldn't hear a word that was said. I did not creep any closer because I began to tremble all over. Then I felt terrified, and I turned back and was just going to bolt home when something came behind me and I fell over." "I found him, sir," put in Nob. "Mr. Butterbur sent me out with a lantern. I went down to Westgate and then back up toward Southgate. Just nigh Bill Ferny's house, I thought I could see something on the road. I couldn't swear to it, but it looked to me as if two men was stooping over something, lifting it. I gave a shout, but when I got up to the spot there was no signs of them, and only Mr. Brandybuck lying by the roadside. He seemed to be asleep. I thought I had fallen into deep water, he says to me, when I shook him. Very queer he was, and soon as I had roused him, he got up and ran back here like a hare. I am afraid that's true, said Mary, though I don't know what I said. I had an ugly dream which I can't remember. I went to pieces. I don't know what came over me. I do, said Strider. The Black Breath. The riders must have left their horses outside and passed back through the south gate in secret. They will know all the news now, for they have visited Bill Ferny, and probably that Southerner was a spy as well. Something may happen in the night before we leave Bree. What will happen? Said Mary. Will they attack the inn? No, I think not, said Strider. They are not all here yet, and in any case, that is not their way. In dark and loneliness they are strongest. They will not openly attack a house where there are lights and many people. Not until they are desperate, not while all the long leagues of Eriador still lie before us. But their power is in terror, and already some in Bree are in their clutch. They will drive these wretches to some evil work. Ferny and some of the strangers, and maybe the gatekeeper too. They had words with Harry at Westgate. At Westgate on Monday. I was watching them. He was white and shaking when they left him. We seem to have enemies all around, said Frodo. What are we to do? Stay here, and do not go to your rooms. They are sure to have found out which those are. The Hobbit rooms have windows looking north and close to the ground. We will all remain together and bar this window and the door. But first Nob and I will fetch your luggage. While Strider was gone, Frodo gave Mary a rapid account of all that had happened since the supper. Mary was still reading and pondering Gandalf's letter when Strider and Nob returned. Well, masters, said Nob, I've ruffled up the clothes and put in a bolster down the middle of each bed, and I made a nice imitation of your head with a brown woolen mat. Mr. Bag, Underhill, sir, he added with a grin. Pippin laughed. Very lifelike, he said, but what will happen when they have penetrated the disguise? We shall see, said Strider. Let us hope to hold the fort till morning. Good night to you, said Nob, and went off to take his part in the watch on the doors. Their bags and gear they piled on the parlor floor. They pushed a low chair against the door and shut the window. Peering out, Frodo saw that the night was still clear. The sickle was swinging bright above the shoulders of Bree Hill, and then closed and barred the heavy inside shutters and drew the curtains together. Strider built up the fire and blew out all the candles. And the sickle, it says here, is the Hobbit's name for the plow or the Great Bear. So it's the Big Dipper. The hobbits lay down on their blankets with their feet toward the earth, but Strider settled himself in the chair against the door. They talked for a little, for Mary still had several questions to ask. Jumped over the moon, chuckled Mary as he rolled himself in his blanket. Very ridiculous of you, Frodo, but I wish I had been there to see. The worthies of Bree will be discussing it 100 years since. I hope so, said Strider, and they all fell silent. One by one, the hobbits dropped off to sleep. End of chapter 10. Now, chapter 11. A Knife in the Dark. As they prepared for sleep in the inn at Bree, darkness lay on Buckland. A mist strayed in the dells and along the riverbank. The house at Crickwillow stood silent. Fatty Bulger opened the door cautiously and peered out. A feeling of fear had been growing in him all day, and he was unable to rest or go to bed. There was a brooding threat in the breathless night air. As he stared out into the gloom, a black shadow moved under the trees. The gate seemed to open of its own accord and close again without a sound. Terror seized him. He shrank back, and for a moment he stood trembling in the hall. Then he shut and locked the door. The night deepened. There came the soft sound of horses led with stealth along the lane. Outside the gate they stopped, and 3 black figures entered, like shades of night creeping across the ground. One went to the door. one to the corner of the house on either side, and there they stood, as still as the shadows of stones, while night went slowly on. The house and the quiet trees seemed to be waiting breathlessly. There was a faint stir in the leaves, and a cock crowed far away. The cold hour before dawn was passing. The figure by the door moved. In the dark, without moon or stars, a drawn blade gleamed, as if a chill light had been unsheathed. There was a blow, soft but heavy, at the door. Shuddered. Excuse me. There was a blow, soft but heavy, and the door shuddered. "Open in the name of Mordor," said a voice, thin and menacing. At a second blow, the door yielded and fell back. Thank you, Sergeant.
No, go
Go ahead. Thank you. At a second blow, the door yielded and fell back, with timbers burst and lock broken. The black figures passed swiftly in. At that moment, among the trees nearby, a horn rang out. It rent the night like fire on a hilltop. "Awake! Fear! Fire! Foes! Awake!" Fatty Bulger had not been idle. As soon as he saw the dark shapes creep from the garden, he knew that he must run for it, or perish. And run he did, out of the back door, through the garden, and over the fields. When he reached the nearest house, more than a mile away, he collapsed on the doorstep. "No, no, no," he was crying. "Not me! I haven't got it!" It was some time before anyone could make out what he was babbling about. At last they got the idea that enemies were in Buckland, some strange invasion from the old forest, and they lost no time. "Fear! Fire! Foes!" The Brandybucks were blowing the horn call of Buckland. They had not been sounded for 100 years, not since the white wolves came in fell winter, when the Brandywine was frozen over. "Awake! Awake!" Far away, answered horns were heard. The alarm was spreading. The black figures fled from the house. One of them let fall a hobbit cloak on the step as he ran. In the lane, the noise of hoofs broke out, and gathering to a gallop, went hammering away into the darkness. All about Crick Hollow, there was the sound of horns blowing, and voices crying, and feet running. But the black riders rode like a gale to the north gate. Let the little people blow. Sauron would deal with them later. Meanwhile, they had another errand. They knew now that the house was empty and the ring had gone. They rode down the guards at the gate and vanished from the Shire. In the early night, Frodo woke from deep sleep, suddenly as if some sound or presence had disturbed him. He saw that Strider was sitting alert in his chair. His eyes gleamed in the light of the fire, which had been tended and was burning brightly, but he made no sign or movement. Frodo soon went to sleep again, but his dreams were again troubled with the noise of wind and galloping hoofs. The wind seemed to be curling round the house and shaking it, and far off he heard a horn blowing wildly. He opened his eyes and heard a cock crowing lustily in the inn-yard. Strider had drawn the curtains and pushed back the shutters with a clang. The first gray light of day was in the room, and a cold air was coming through the open window. As soon as Strider had roused them all, he led the way to their bedrooms. When they saw them, they were glad that they had taken his advice. The windows had been forced open and were swinging, and the curtains were flapping. The beds were tossed about, and the bolsters slashed and flung upon the door. The brown mat was torn to pieces. Strider immediately went to fetch the landlord. Poor Mr. Butterbur looked sleepy and frightened. He had hardly closed his eyes all night, so he said, but he had never heard a sound. "Never has such a thing happened in my time," he cried, raising his hands in horror. "Guests unable to sleep in their beds, and good bolsters ruined and all. What are we coming to?" "Dark times," said Strider, "but for the present you may be left in peace when you have got rid of us. We will leave at once. Never mind about breakfast. A drink and a bite standing will have to do. We shall be packed in a few minutes." Mr. Butterbur hurried off to see that their ponies were got ready, and to fetch them a bite, but very soon he came back in dismay. The ponies had vanished. The stable doors had all been opened in the night, and they were gone. Not only Mary's ponies, but every other horse and beast in the place. Frodo was crushed by the news. How could they hope to reach Rivendell on foot, pursued by mounted enemies? They might as well set out for the moon. Strider sat silent for a while, looking at the hobbits as if he was weighing up their strength and courage. Ponies would not help us to escape horsemen, he said at last, thoughtfully, as if he guessed what Frodo had in mind. We should not go much slower on foot, not on the roads that I mean to take. I was going to walk in any case. It is the food and stores that trouble me. We cannot count on getting anything to eat between here and Rivendell, except what we take with us, and we ought to take plenty to spare, for we may be delayed, or forced to go round about far out of the direct way. How much are you prepared to carry on your backs? As much as we must, said Pippin, with a sinking heart, but trying to show that he was stronger than he looked, or felt. I can carry enough for two, said Sam defiantly. Can't anything be done, Mr. Butterbur? Said Frodo. Can't we get a couple of ponies in the village, or even just one for the baggage? I don't suppose we could hire them, but we might be able to buy them, he added doubtfully, wondering if he could afford it. I doubt it, said the landlord unhappily. The 2 or 3 riding ponies that there were in Bree were stabled in my yard, and they're gone. As for other animals, horses or ponies for draft or whatnot, there are very few of them in Bree, and they won't be for sale. But I'll do what I can. I'll rout out Bob and send him round as soon as it may be. Yes, said Strider reluctantly. You had better do that. I'm afraid we shall have to try to get one pony at least. But so ends all hope of starting early and slipping away quietly. We might as well have blown a horn to announce our departure. That was part of their plan, no doubt. There is one crumb of comfort, said Mary, and more than a crumb, I hope. We can have breakfast while we wait, and sit down to it. Let's get hold of Nob. In the end, there was more than 3 hours' delay. Bob came back with a report that no horse or pony was to be got for love or money in the neighborhood, except one. Bill Ferny had one that he might possibly sell. A poor old half-starved creature it is, said Bob, but he won't part with it for less than thrice its worth, seeing how you're placed. Not if I knows Bill Ferny. Bill Ferny, said Frodo. Isn't there some trick? Wouldn't the beast bolt back to him with all our stuff, or help in tracking us or something? I wonder, said Strider, but I cannot imagine any animal running home to him once it got away. I fancy that this is only an afterthought of kind Master Ferny's, just a way of increasing his profits from the affair. The chief danger is that the poor beast is probably at death's door, but there does not seem to be any choice. What does he want for it? Bill Ferny's price was 12 silver pennies, and that was indeed at least 3 times the pony's value in those parts. It proved to be a bony, underfed, and dispirited animal, but it did not look like dying just yet. Mr. Butterbur paid for it himself and offered Mary another 18 pence as some compensation for the lost animals. He was an honest man, and well off as things were reckoned in Bree, but 30 silver pennies was a sore blow to him, and being cheated by Bill Ferny made it harder to bear. As a matter of fact, he came out on the right side in the end. It turned out later that only one horse had been actually stolen. The others had been driven off, or had bolted in terror, and were found wandering in different corners of the Bree land. Mary's ponies had escaped altogether, and eventually, having a good deal of sense, they made their way to the downs in search of Fatty Lumpkin. So they came under the care of Tom Bombadil for a while, and were well off. But when news of the events at Bree came to Tom's ears, he sent them to Mr. Butterbur, who thus got 5 good beasts at a very fair price. They had to work harder in Bree, but Bob treated them well, so on the whole they were lucky. They missed a dark and dangerous journey, but they never came to Rivendell. However, in the meanwhile, for all Mr. Butterbur knew, his money was gone for good, or for bad, and he had other troubles, for there was a great commotion as soon as the remaining guests were astir and heard the news of the raid on the inn. The southern travelers had lost several horses and blamed the innkeeper loudly, until it became known that one of their own number had also disappeared in the night, none other than Bill Ferny's squinty-eyed companion. Suspicion fell on him at once. "If you pick up with a horse thief and bring him to my house," said Butterbur angrily, "you ought to pay for all the damage yourselves and not come shouting at me. Go and ask Ferny where your handsome friend is." But it appeared that he was nobody's friend, and nobody could recollect when he had joined their party. All right, I'm going to stop there, kiddos. I love you always and forever, no matter what.